Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to our first meeting of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific. And I want to welcome all my colleagues, as I say, to the very first hearing this Congress. And I want to acknowledge my friend from American Samoa, the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Faleomavaega. It's been a pleasure working with you over the years. And I welcome the opportunity now to sit side by side with you heading this committee. So I look forward to the opportunity to work as we all. Eni and I actually were the representatives from the House of Representatives to the UN for a year back, and I think it was around right after 2001, the attack on our nation for about a year. So it was an interesting time, and we've been friends for a long time now, even though we're different parties. We actually do get along in this institution. Now yield to the gentleman from American Samoa, Mr. Faleomavaega, for a 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly want to say for the record how pleased and an honor for me personally to have you as chairman of this important subcommittee. And also I want to welcome our colleagues in the subcommittee as we will be discussing and I'm sure dialoguing some very important issues affecting this region of the world. I also want to offer my personal welcome to two gentlemen who will be testifying before our subcommittee. In all the years that I've been here, Mr. Chairman, this is the first time in history that we have now 2 assistant secretaries testifying before this committee. So I'm really, really blessed and very, very happy to see Secretary Blake and also Secretary Huon here with us this morning. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this hearing. I could not think of a better subject or issue that we should be discussing. As I've said for many years, in the years that I've served in this committee, in my personal opinion, nobody wanted to talk about Asia-Pacific issues because the entire mentality here in Washington, both in the Congress and previous administrations, was towards Europe and the Middle East. If we weren't bashing the Chinese, we were bashing the Japanese. Nothing positive in terms of our looking at the Asia-Pacific region as an important and integral part of our what should be our relationship with this region. Today we are playing catch-up in a region that accounts for more than 60% of the world's population. In 2011, the Asia-Pacific region surpassed Europe to become the top exporter of merchandise. 2 years ago, or 2010, I'm sorry, the world's top container ports were in the Asia-Pacific region, including the top 5 container ports in the world are in the Asia-Pacific region. I remember a couple of years ago, the late Senator Daniel Inouye made an observation that for every 747 that flies across the Atlantic, 4 747s fly between the Pacific and the United States. The U.S. has a vital interest in making sure there's a free flow of global trade and commerce through the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean. The Strait of Malacca is one of the most important shipping lanes in the world. Thousands of vessels pass through the strait per year, carrying about 1/4 of the world's traded goods, including oil. About 1/4 of the oil carried by sea passes through the strait. I might also comment, Mr. Chairman, that another very important strait that is connected to the Indian Ocean is the Strait of Hormuz between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We need to remember that as well. For the first time since 1979, Iran naval forces just crossed the Strait of Malacca and will dock in China, India, or Sri Lanka. Regarding Sri Lanka, Mr. Chairman, I agree with the Kerry Lugar congressional report, which declares we need to rechart U.S. strategy in Sri Lanka beyond humanitarian and political reforms. The U.S. simply cannot afford to lose Sri Lanka due to its strategic importance. Last week, I had the privilege of visiting Sri Lanka and met with President Rajapaksa for more than 2 hours. I also met with Governor of the Northern Province and personally visited Jaffna because I wanted to see for myself the post-conflict development since 2009, when Sri Lanka finally became the first country in the world to eradicate terrorism on its own soil by defeating the Tamil Tigers, which remains listed as the terrorist organization by 32 countries, including our own country, Mr. Chairman, India, Canada, and members of the European Union, and dubbed by the FBI as one of the most ruthless terrorist organizations in the world. After a 30-year terrorist conflict or war, the challenges Sri Lankan government faces are enormous, but the strides the government has made to rebuild in a way that establishes lasting peace and equality for all citizens should be firmly acknowledged. The United States should join Australia in praising the work the Sri Lankan government has done in the north and east of the island in such a short period since the war, as Australian Deputy Opposition Leader Julie Bishop and the parliamentary delegation she led recently stated on their visit. Regrettably, in the resolution it intends to submit again to the United Nations Human Rights Council, the U.S. fails to mention one, not even one positive development for Sri Lanka. Such failure suggests that the United States is not being even-handed when it comes to dealing with sensitive human rights issues across the globe. And I am, Mr. Chairman, deeply concerned that our inconsistent policies which lead to a loss of credibility for the United States, which will negatively impact our relations in the Asia-Pacific region for years to come. So I call upon my government, the United States of America, to find a better way forward rather than using United Nations resolutions to destabilize developing nations like Sri Lanka while ignoring human rights abuses in nations like Indonesia, where our geopolitical and strategic and military interests supersede our human rights agenda. The U.S.-led United Nations resolution should also be withdrawn for focusing only on the last few months of the war and failing to acknowledge that for almost 30 years, Mr. Chairman, the Tamil Tigers hacked to death innocent women, men, women, and children in Sri Lanka, carried out some 378 suicide attacks, more than any other terrorist organization in the world. And we also do not need to criticize Sri Lanka for borrowing money from China. And by the way, I was there, Mr. Chairman. In terms of our ability to provide assistance to these third world countries, China was able to provide Sri Lanka with $500 million of low-interest loans for them to rebuild their seaport, as well as a brand-new international airport that I was there to witness. I also want to suggest that it is time for our government to begin a dialogue with the Chief Minister Modi, who may well be the next Prime Minister for India. The U.S.-India relationship is significant, as you have commented in your statement, Mr. Chairman. It is one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century, and Chief Minister Modi is a leading figure in that process. Chief Minister Modi's philosophy of bringing development to the doorstep of every poor person, every farmer, every worker, is a philosophy that transcends caste, culture, regional, and religious differences, and has led to a decade of unprecedented growth and development in the province of the state of Gujarat, a key state which has contributed considerably to India's economy and development. Companies like Ford and General Motors are setting up factories in Gujarat, and in a move that promises to strengthen U.S.-India relations now and in the years to come. I know my time is up, Mr. Chairman. I will leave the rest for another opportunity, but I do want to thank you and thank my colleagues for their attendance at this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce our distinguished panel here this afternoon. We'll begin with Ambassador Robert Blake, who is the Assistant Secretary for South and Central Asia at the U.S. State Department. As Assistant Secretary, he oversees U.S. foreign policy with India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, the Maldives, Bhutan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. He previously served as Ambassador to Sri Lanka and the Maldives from 2006 to mid-2009 and Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Mission in New Delhi, India from 2003 to 2006. Since entering the Foreign Service in 1985, he served at the American embassies in Tunisia, Algeria, Nigeria, and Egypt. And we welcome you here this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to say to Secretary Blake, this is not in any way a personal attack on you in any way, but I do want to follow up on the Chairman's question and concerns about the situation in Sri Lanka. I had mentioned in my statement about the double standard that we're applying as far as violation of human rights. And the sense that I have is, why is the most powerful country in the world picking on a small little country like Sri Lanka, the size of West Virginia, 60,000 square miles with only 3 million people, and yet in Sri Lanka, we're talking about 21 million people living there. The serious question I have is that for 27 or 29 years, this country was in a state of civil war. It's not a conflict. It's not a question of the Tamil people asking for more autonomy. And we have to understand not all Tamils are members of this terrorist organization called the LTTE or Tamil Tigers that our government, along with 32 other countries, also categorized as a terrorist organization. And in the process, you're talking about 27 years for some 80 to 100,000 Sri Lankans ended up dead. A lot of innocent men, women, and children. And what I'm trying to seek here is that there also was a country that had a civil war. It was the United States of America. For 4 years, we ended up with 600,000 of our soldiers died from that terrible conflict. And it wasn't a question of the southern states asking for autonomy. They wanted to secede and pull away from the mother country, just like the Tamil Tigers wanted to do in their efforts in seeking this war against the Tamil government. My concern here is that we are looking at such a small little sequence of this 2 or 3 months that now we're questioning, and the reason why we have this resolution before the United Nations Human Rights Council, but forgetting the fact that for 29 years, the Sri Lankan government has had to deal with this terrorist organization that I just could not believe the atrocities that were committed by these people. And now overnight, we just think, oh, we've got to hit this resolution against them. This is where my concern with double standard. Our government, for the 10-year period that we were in war in Vietnam, Mr. Secretary, let's ask the tens of thousands of women and children, innocent civilians, that were exposed to Agent Orange when we were there for the 10-year period. Let's ask the people in Laos and Cambodia for the 6 million pounds of cluster bombs that we dropped there. These countries never declared war on us. Where is the consistency in our standards as far as human rights are concerned? That we're pointing the finger at this little country, Sri Lanka, and to think that perhaps that maybe we need to clean up our own backyard and suggest that maybe we be a little more consistent. If we're going to do it against Sri Lanka, let's make sure that we're clean ourselves. So I just wanted your comment on that. I've got only 1 minute left on this.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Let me just say, with respect to the LTT, we fully agree. The United States was one of the very first countries to declare the LTT a foreign terrorist organization, and we have a long line of public statements and other condemnations that we issued for the terrible acts of terrorism that they were responsible for. We also took concrete action to help the Sri Lankans. We gave them radar systems so that they would be able to detect LTT.
In fact, we helped the Sri Lankan government fight against the Navy that even the Tamil Tigers had.
So we certainly took a very uncompromising view with respect to the LTT. But again, at the very end of the war, the question is, what happened to those 10 to 40,000 civilians who were killed? And I think everybody in Sri Lanka believes that there needs to be closure on that question. Right. And closure needs to be achieved through this Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission process. It's a domestic process, so it should have the support of the government, and we hope that that will continue, and that's the purpose of this resolution. But there needs to be justice, Mr. Chairman, for there to be closure, and there needs to be reconciliation between these communities. So that's what we're trying to achieve. And
I know I've only got 10 more seconds, Mr. Secretary. I just want to say that that was part of the subject that I discussed this personally with the President of Sri Lanka, and he is concerned. Good. In fact, he's spending more time up there in the northern province and all the amount of resources they're trying to do to make this as part of the reconciliation process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.